Nobody expected Cage himself to step back into the spotlight and deliver the most washed-up superhero in comic book history. Welcome to the brand new 2026 Marvel series, Spider-Noir. Unlike the usual energetic and colorful tone associated with the Spider-Man franchise, this series drags viewers into a dark and deeply depressing world instead. The story takes place during New York's Great Depression era. Played by Nicolas Cage, Spider-Man Ben is the only superhero in this parallel universe. During the day, he is nothing more than an ordinary private detective struggling to survive. But once night falls, Ben transforms into the terrifying Spider-Man feared by every criminal in the city. Unfortunately, all of that ended with the death of his girlfriend. From that moment onward, Ben sealed away the Spider-Man suit and completely abandoned the life of a hero, returning to the existence of an ordinary man. 5 years pass in the blink of an eye, and Ben is still the same unknown private investigator, scraping by in silence. One day, while tracking a target named Addison, he accidentally gets struck by a car while crossing the street. To avoid exposing his superhuman abilities, Ben simply lies on the ground, pretending to be unconscious. Only after a crowd gathers around him does he quietly get back up and continue the pursuit. Using his enhanced spider sense abilities, Ben tracks Addison all the way to an oil refinery. That is when he realizes he is far from the only person hunting the man. But during the tense confrontation, Addison's entire body suddenly erupts into flames. To Ben's shock, the target turns out to be another superpowered individual. The spreading fire instantly ignites nearby fuel barrels, triggering a massive explosion. Addison is killed on the spot, while the other man pursuing him is blown unconscious by the blast wave. Ben searches through the stranger's wallet and discovers that he, too, is a private detective. At that point, Ben's confusion only deepens. What exactly made Addison so important that multiple factions were desperately trying to capture him? Could it really all be because of his fire-based abilities? Unfortunately, with Addison now dead, Ben's original investigation has completely fallen apart. Back at the detective office, his only assistant begins complaining nonstop. She has not received a paycheck in months, and if things continue this way, even their phone service will soon be shut off. Just as Ben struggles to figure out how to keep the agency afloat, a new client suddenly walks through the door. A man suspects his wife is having an affair and hires Ben to gather evidence. For Spider-Man, this kind of surveillance job is almost laughably easy. Without hesitation, Ben accepts the case. After the client leaves, Ben heads to a small cafe to meet his journalist friend Robbie. He is one of the few people who knows Ben's true identity. The moment they sit down, Robbie immediately begins venting his frustration. Ever since Spider-Man disappeared, the crime boss Silvermane has expanded his influence without resistance, even secretly forming connections with corrupt government officials. Now the entire city has fallen under his control. Crime runs rampant everywhere, and ordinary people are left suffering in despair. Robbie desperately hopes Ben will put the Spider-Man suit back on and once again become the hero who saves the city from darkness. But Ben has already lost all faith. He coldly tells Robbie that fighting Silvermane is meaningless. Even if they take down one Silvermane today, another one will simply rise tomorrow. Ironically, the front page headline in that very day's newspaper reports that Silvermane's mansion mysteriously caught fire overnight, nearly burning the underground kingpin alive. Coincidentally, the Addison Ben encountered the previous night possessed the power to manipulate flames. Ben immediately suspects the fire is somehow connected to him. Still, he has no time to investigate further. Right now, finishing the cheating spouse case for his client matters more. Ben spent an entire day staking out a hotel until he finally spots the target woman, Kat. He quietly follows her all the way to the elevators, only to be stopped by security guards. Left with no other option, Ben sneaks toward the emergency stairwell instead. By the time he climbs all the way to the top floor, the former Spider-Man is already exhausted and breathing heavily. Carefully cracking open the hotel room door, Ben sees Kat entangled with another man inside. Without hesitation, he raises his camera to take photos. But in the next second, the situation suddenly turns violent as the two begin struggling with each other. Ben has always hated watching women get hurt. For the first time in years, he finally uses his powers again. The following day, Ben returns to the detective office only to discover that the mysterious client who hired him to track Addison has shown up personally. After all, the man already paid a deposit in advance. Ben casually smiles and deliberately avoids mentioning Addison's death. Instead, he immediately raises the price. He explains that Addison possessed dangerous fire-based abilities and clearly was not an ordinary person. $30 is nowhere near enough compensation for a case like this. Furious, the client storms out and slams the door behind him. But that reaction is exactly what Ben wanted. Deep down, he is far more interested in uncovering the client's true identity. So Ben secretly follows him by car. Meanwhile, another detective from the refinery incident, Perry, is doing the exact same thing. Perry is equally fascinated by Addison's supernatural abilities, and that very night he agrees to work together with Ben on the investigation. However, neither of them expects the client to eventually enter Silvermane's abandoned mansion. Only then do they finally realize the truth. The man behind the mission to capture Addison is none other than the underground crime king himself, Silvermane. Silvermane apparently already knew Addison possessed superhuman abilities, and he also suspected Addison was responsible for burning down the mansion. What he does not know, however, is that Addison is already dead. Silvermane even declares that he is willing to do absolutely anything necessary to capture him alive. After quietly slipping back out of the room, Perry becomes visibly excited. He wants to use the information about Addison's death to extort a massive payout from Silvermane. But Ben wants absolutely nothing to do with something this dangerous. He calmly warns Perry that some money simply is not worth earning. After returning to the detective office, Ben's assistant finishes developing the photos taken the previous night. But to Ben's surprise, the man secretly meeting with Kat turns out to be none other than the mayor of New York. The moment he realizes this, Ben immediately understands how dangerous the situation has become. He wants absolutely no involvement in a political scandal this massive, so he quickly contacts the jealous husband who hired him and lies, claiming his wife was never cheating at all. He even voluntarily returns the deposit money. But just after the client leaves, Ben's spider sense suddenly activates without warning. The strange part is that nothing dangerous appears to be happening nearby. Then, almost immediately afterward, his assistant angrily threatens to quit and go work at a department store if she does not receive her overdue salary soon. Desperate to save the struggling agency, she suddenly comes up with a terrible idea. Since they cannot afford to offend the mayor directly, why not use the photographs to blackmail Kat instead? Hearing this suggestion, Ben quietly falls into thought. That very night, he heads to the nightclub where Kat performs as a singer. To his surprise, she is actually somewhat famous around the city. Sitting alone in the corner, Ben carefully studies the woman from a distance. But as the stage lights slowly dim around her performance, his expression gradually changes. Kat's elegant figure and striking appearance bear an unsettling resemblance to Ben's deceased girlfriend. By the time the song ends, Ben is still struggling to recover from the shock. And at that exact moment, he suddenly notices another familiar face sitting among the audience, Silvermane himself. However, after receiving a report from one of his men, Silvermane quickly leaves the club in a hurry. He descends into the basement, where Private Detective Perry has been tied up and beaten. It turns out Perry attempted to extort a fortune from Silvermane using the information about Addison's death, only to discover that Silvermane is not the kind of man who plays fair. Faced with death, Perry has no choice but to confess everything he knows about Addison's final moments. But even after hearing the truth, Silvermane still refuses to spare him. After killing Perry, he coldly declares that the other witness, Ben, must be eliminated as well. Meanwhile, Ben remains completely unaware that danger is already closing in around him. He approaches Kat backstage after her performance and casually shows her the photographs of her meeting with the mayor, asking how much she would pay to recover the negatives. Unexpectedly, Kat refuses immediately, showing no fear whatsoever. But after Ben leaves the club, Kat secretly signals her bodyguard to follow him. Clearly, she plans to steal the negatives back by force instead. Unfortunately for her, the bodyguard has chosen the wrong target. The moment Ben notices he is being followed, he calmly leads the man toward an abandoned construction site. Once they are completely alone, the bodyguard finally drops the act and warns Ben to hand over the photographs peacefully if he wants to avoid trouble. Naturally, Ben refuses. The two quickly begin fighting, but Ben does not even need to rely on his superhuman abilities to overpower the man with ease. Yet just as the bodyguard struggles back to his feet, something horrifying suddenly happens. The surface of his body rapidly begins turning into sand. To Ben's shock, the man possesses supernatural abilities as well. Before Ben could even recover from the shock, a boulder the size of a punching bag came crashing into him and sent him flying through the air. Backed into a corner with no other choice, he could no longer hide his powers. Using his webbing, Ben swung himself back onto the rooftop, and within moments, he took the bodyguard down once again. But just as he was about to question him, Kat suddenly rushed upstairs. To Ben's surprise, the bodyguard had absolutely no memory of what had just happened. Ben knows that anything connected to superpowers usually leads to massive trouble, so he voluntarily hands over the film negatives, wanting nothing more to do with these people. Unfortunately, that also means he loses a huge amount of money for nothing. This completely breaks his assistant's patience, and she immediately starts packing her things, ready to quit on the spot. However, at that exact moment, Kat walks into the office and claims she has a big job for Ben. It turns out the same bodyguard who followed him the previous night has mysteriously disappeared. Even though every part of the situation feels suspicious, Ben eventually accepts the case for the sake of his nearly bankrupt agency. After receiving a $50 advance payment, the assistant finally stops talking about resigning. Kat then begins explaining the bodyguard's identity. His name is Flint, and he was once one of Silvermane's most trusted enforcers. About 6 months earlier, he suddenly gained the ability to transform into sand and stone. Yet nobody knows where the power came from. Ben is equally curious about Flint, so later that day, he sneaks into the man's apartment to investigate. Inside a wooden box hidden in a drawer, he discovers a stack of photographs, and one of them shows Flint standing beside the fire-powered mutant Addison. That is when Ben realizes both men awakened superpowers recently, and there is no way that can simply be a coincidence. Just as he falls into deep thought, his spider sense suddenly goes off. Ben quickly slips into a closet, and seconds later, 2 men in suits walk into the apartment. Flint's disappearance has apparently alarmed Silvermane as well, prompting him to send people to investigate. Ben notices that his hat is still sitting on the table, so he secretly pulls it into the closet using a strand of webbing. But the water stains left on the tabletop still reveal signs that someone has recently been there. One of the suited men tries to open the closet, only to discover the latch tightly wrapped in sticky webs. Assuming the lock is simply old and damaged, he decides not to look further. At the same time, the assistant is not sitting around either. She makes a special trip to the archives office and secretly steals Flint's personnel records. The documents reveal that Flint used to be a soldier and even fought in the famous Argonne campaign. But after leaving the military, he never accomplished anything meaningful and eventually became one of Silvermane's top-hired thugs. Ben immediately connects this to the fire-powered superhuman, and all the clues now seem to point toward the same person, Silvermane. What Ben never expects, however, is that while he is investigating Silvermane, Silvermane has already started watching him as well. The moment Ben returns home, he runs into 2 intimidating thugs waiting for him. To avoid exposing his powers, he deliberately pretends to surrender without resistance. But once he learns during the ride that the 2 men are working for Silvermane, Ben immediately decides to fight back. However, when Ben returns to the office the next day, he finds his assistant crouching on the floor, cleaning up the complete mess left behind. It turns out Silvermane's men failed to capture Ben, so they came to the agency and trashed the entire place instead. They even pressed a gun against the assistant's head at one point, yet she still refuses to reveal where Ben is hiding. Seeing the tears covering her face, Ben is overwhelmed with guilt and admits that he dragged her into all of this. But the assistant simply shakes her head and says none of that matters anymore, because starting today, she is truly leaving for good. For the past 5 years, she has been waiting for Ben to pull himself together and become the hero who once fought against crime again. But all she has received in return is disappointment after disappointment. Her departure finally shatters the last bit of avoidance inside Ben's heart. He used to be the protector of this city, yet now he cannot even protect the people closest to him. At that moment, Ben finally stops running away. He pulls out the Spider-Man suit that has remained untouched for 5 entire years. Meanwhile, Silvermane has just finished inspecting a shipment of smuggled liquor. But while returning, one of his men suddenly notices a figure rapidly swinging between the skyscrapers. Fear instantly spreads across everyone's faces because they recognize the man who vanished 5 years ago, Spider-Man. Relying on the firearms in their hands, the gangsters force themselves to open fire and stop him. But in front of Spider-Sense, their attacks look almost laughable. Within only a few breaths, every single thug is beaten to the ground. Knowing there is no escape, Silvermane simply sits motionless inside the car. However, Spider-Man does not appear this time to kill him. Instead, He personally warns Silvermane to stay away from the detective named Ben and never touch the people around him again. After Ben returns to the office, the phone on the desk suddenly rings, and reporter Robbie's anxious voice comes through from the other side. It turns out the police had already received a tip from an informant and secretly set up an ambush at the docks, preparing to capture both Silvermane and the smuggled goods in one operation. Unexpectedly, Spider-Man suddenly appeared and accidentally helped Silvermane escape instead. The situation leaves Ben both speechless and frustrated. Has he seriously tried to do the right thing only to make everything worse? And deep down, he cannot shake the feeling that an invisible hand is secretly manipulating everything from the shadows. That concludes the full story of episodes 1 and 2 of Spider-Noir. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next episode.